20 miles off the west coast of Scotland, past the edge of the Outer Hebrides, there is a small group of rocky islands with almost nothing on them. No trees, no shelter, no permanent inhabitants, and never really any. Just grass, seabirds, and cliffs that go straight down into the Atlantic. On the largest of them, in 1899, a lighthouse was lit for the first time. And a year later, in December 1900, a relief boat arrived and found nobody there. 3 men had been on that rock. All 3 were gone. Now, you have probably heard some version of this story, and if you have almost certainly heard details that are not true. A half-eaten meal left on the table, an overturned chair, a logbook describing a terrible storm, and the men weeping and praying in a lighthouse where nothing was actually happening. None of that is in the record. All of it was invented later, and it has almost entirely replaced what really happened, which is both more ordinary and much sadder. So let's do the real version. Start with the place, because the place is most of the explanation. The island is essentially a lump of rock rising steeply out of the open Atlantic. There is no harbor. There is no beach. There were 2 landing places, one on the east side and one on the west, and both of them were simply points where the rock was slightly less impossible than elsewhere. Getting supplies ashore meant a crane and a set of steps cut into the cliff. The building sat at the top, about 150 feet above the sea, which sounds like plenty. Remember that number. 3 keepers were stationed there on a rotation, with a 4th man ashore who swapped in. In December 1900, the 3 on the rock were the principal keeper, an experienced man who had been in the service for years, the 2nd assistant, and a 3rd man who was standing in for a colleague who was ill. That last detail matters later. On the 15th of December, a passing steamer noticed something wrong. The light was not showing. For a lighthouse, that is close to the worst thing that can happen, because ships navigate by it. But the steamer had no radio, and by the time it reached port and the report worked its way through to the lighthouse authority, days had gone by. Meanwhile, the relief boat, which should have gone out around the 20th, could not sail. The weather was too bad. It finally reached the island on Boxing Day, the 26th of December, 11 days after the light went out. And here is what the relief keeper found. Nobody at the landing, no flag flying, no supply boxes put out ready in the way they always were. He climbed the steps, and the gate at the top was closed. The main door was closed. Inside, the kitchen was tidy. The pots and dishes had been cleaned and put away. The beds were not made. The fire in the grate had gone out and the ashes were cold, and the clock had stopped. That is the actual list. Not a meal abandoned mid-bite. Not a chair knocked over. A tidy room, a coal hearth, and a stopped clock. There was one detail that did carry real information. Lighthouse keepers on a rock like that had heavy oilskin coats for going outside. 2 of the 3 sets were missing. One was still hanging up, and it belonged to the man who was standing in for the sick colleague. Now, think about what that means. The regulations were clear. 1 keeper was always supposed to remain in the lighthouse. Always. So if all 3 were gone, something had happened that made a man break a standing rule and go out without stopping to put on his coat into December weather on an Atlantic rock. The last entry in the log was on the morning of the 15th. Routine. Weather noted. Nothing unusual recorded. An investigation was ordered, and the superintendent who carried it out went to the island himself. He was not a stranger to it. He had supervised the building of the lighthouse, and he had personally appointed all 3 of the men. He knew them. And what he found on the west landing is the whole answer. The west side of the island had been badly damaged. A wooden supply box was fixed to the rock in a crevice about 110 feet above the sea. It had been torn apart. Its contents, ropes, and crane handles and tackle were scattered across the rocks. Iron railings along the path were bent out of shape, and a section of them was wrenched clear. A large rock, weighing over a ton, had been shifted from its position, and turf had been ripped away from the cliff top, in places up to about 100 feet above the water. That is what the sea had done to that island while the men were on it. So the superintendent's conclusion was straightforward, and it has never been seriously improved on. The weather in the days before the 15th had been extremely rough. The men would have known that the equipment at the west landing was at risk. Securing it was part of the job. So they went down to make it fast, and while they were down there, the sea came up. Not a normal wave. On a coast like that, in conditions like those, water can be thrown to heights that seem impossible if you have not seen it. The damage they found 110 feet up is the evidence. One man most likely saw it happen from above, or heard it, and ran out without his coat to help. And that was that. 3 men. In about the time it takes to read this sentence, there was no mystery. There was a landing that had been destroyed, and 3 set of footsteps that stopped there. So where does the rest of it come from? The overturned chair, the uneaten meal, the dramatic log entries. The answer is that the story was too good to leave alone. 12 years afterwards, a poet published a poem about the disappearance, which took considerable liberties. That poem is where a great deal of the imagery comes from, and it was widely read and widely remembered. And gradually, the poem became the account. Then, decades later, a magazine article went further and invented the log entries wholesale. Storms that never happened on days when the weather records show it was calm. A hardened seaman crying, another praying, a final line saying that God was over all. None of it exists in the real logbook, which is preserved and which is boring because real logbooks are. But it's circulated and it kept being reprinted, and it is still being repeated today as though it were evidence. Which brings me to the thing I actually find worth saying about this story. 3 men died doing an ordinary job in an extraordinarily dangerous place. They went out to secure equipment because that was their responsibility. One of them almost certainly broke the one rule that would have kept him safe because 2 of his colleagues were in trouble. That is not a mystery. That is a fairly clear account of people behaving about as well as people behave. And it has been almost entirely buried under 100 years of invented detail because a documented accident is less entertaining than an unexplained vanishing. The superintendent who wrote the report ended it with a short, personal passage. He noted that he had known all 3 men, had appointed them himself, and expressed his regret at their loss. It is not the language of a puzzle. It is the language of a man who has lost 3 colleagues and has to write it down. The lighthouse is still there. It runs automatically now. Nobody lives on the rock. And the light, which went out for 11 days in December 1900, has been showing ever since.